Now, how many of you are in the market for new land? And it might be that you're going for a lease. Maybe you just want to find a new chunk of ground somewhere, but maybe you want to actually buy. And we see a lot of mistakes and see a lot of consistent mistakes of buying land, mistakes that I've made along the way. I bought my first piece in 1995. Crazy how long ago that was, but loved buying that. I still, when I drive by that, there's something about that first chunk of ground that you own that is very, very special. There's a lot of mistakes you can make. I want to help you avoid those. And a lot of these, you can look at it. We've created articles, how to buy deer land, top tips for buying land. I think we came up with 20 before in one of the videos several years ago. And in a lot of these mistakes, just do the opposite. And I'll talk about one that I didn't add on the list. A lot of times people are stretching, and we talk about this, too much land. But a lot of people, when it comes to buying deer hunting property, a lot of that centers around ag land somewhere, just because of deer numbers. You see more deer, maybe bigger bucks, whatever it might be that you want to go to ag land for. And we see that up north. You know, we were hunting in Pennsylvania, where I've hunted since 1993. We hunted this year. And you know how many hunters we saw out on public land for the entire 2 days we were hunting? 0. That's how many we saw. And a lot of those people are migrating to ag land in areas. Some people buy ag land. I think a mistake is that we're going to buy this giant chunk of ag land. We have 80 acres, and then we have 80 acres of ag land. Well, what do you do with the ag land? I look at it, unless you have the means to actually look at that remaining 80 acres of ag land and turn it into wildlife habitat, you might be better off if you're really looking for income-producing property. And I think sometimes a hunter will spin it to their spouse and say, hey, if we buy this, we get this back on the land. Well, if you're paying an extra $300,000 for land and you're getting an extra $8,000, $5,000, $3,000 a year to pay for the income, or for income coming in to put back against that land purchase, maybe you're better off buying something else like a storage unit or apartment complex, or maybe rentals, or maybe you already have a lot of other really aggressive things in your portfolio and you can go with ag because it's very conservative. The point is are you in a position, and I see a lot of people aren't, where they're buying land and they have to because they're spending too much. They can't do anything with that land other than rent it out to the local farmer. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing. I've seen people with millions of dollars in their 401k portfolio, and they want to average about a 3% return back on that land investment, and that goes back into their 401k. But we're talking huge portfolios of money, or they want to diversify because they have other more risky investments. And you know, I'm not a financial advisor, obviously, but the point is that I hate seeing people buy land and then not be able to do anything with it because they're so strapped on the land that they purchase. They have to enroll it into ag, and then they can't touch the ag. So that's one mistake we see. I'll go with number one here, pretty timber. I go to a lot of property, you know, and a lot of clients will tell us this. They've owned the property for 5, 6 years. They're not getting the return on hunting investment that they thought they would, and they have great timber. And they'll say, well, we just really wanted some pretty woods. We thought that would be good for wildlife. Just as a general rule, and we'll go through these real fast now, but the higher the value of the timber, the lower the value for wildlife. If it's all oak, all white oak, red oak, doesn't really matter, and it's dropping a bunch of acorns, that's a really bad thing. If it's high dollar maple, hardwood, that's a really bad thing. So did you buy it for managing timber or for managing wildlife? Look at it this way. If you couldn't hunt, would you still own the land? Think about that for a second. People say, we want to do both. It's both are a priority. Well, would you buy it just to manage timber? The point is that there's no diversity. A property like this lacks no diversity. I want to see deer are creatures of edge. Wildlife are creatures of edge in general. So when you have old timber going to young timber, going to fields, upland cover, swampland, highland versus lowland, then you start to get a lot of edge, and therefore it equals a lot of potential for wildlife and deer. They both go together. Number two, need for water. A lot of people say, well, we've got to have a water source. Why? Why do you have to have a water source? When it comes to whitetails and wildlife, we find they're not on your property because you have a water source. Water helps to define deer movement. So, you know, I've seen properties where we go to and it's 200-acre parcel and they have this swampland, lowland, or they've added ponds or something next to a big interior food plot. That's all the water they have. So in theory, if deer wanted to go to that water every day on their way to food, and you can't hunt it because it's in the middle of your property, now you're pulling deer away from your deer stands. I think it's a sin if you don't have water next to your bow stands. If you have water and you're adding that for deer, put a water tank right next to you, 25 yards away from your bow stand. That's where it should go. I've even had people that I know in the past that have put water 70 yards away from any of their bow stands. They get great pictures at the water, but does it make sense that water tank they have isn't a good thing because it's not attracting more deer to the land. What it's doing is actually pulling deer away from those great bow stands and putting bucks away from their stands instead of in front of their stands. Really, really big difference. And while we're at it, water is a very, very low risk attraction to a mature buck during the daylight hours. Food is the opposite scale of risk. Food is a high risk area. Now maybe if we're talking about a hidden apple tree or white oak, it's dropping acorns out in the woods next to their bedding area, that's a little bit different. But when we talk more food plots, open fields, ag fields, where deer are traditionally going to feed, maybe even a big open clear cut out in public land, that's a risky proposition for deer. They're used to seeing a lot of deer in those locations. It's high stress, and at the same time, there's always that human pressure, people pressure. So just instinctively, deer, when they go to a large open food source, are very wary. That's why they show up right before dark or after dark. You put that low-risk water hole in the food source, you just raised the risk of the water hole to equal the food source. It's not like you add the water there and the water makes the food plot now low risk to deer. So think about that. Separation is very critical for your deer stands. Too much land. This happens all the time. Client has 300 acres. Great job, you have 300 acres, but you have 2 acres of food plots, you have a couple water holes, you can't afford more than 8 or 10 stands, you're strapped, you're having a hard time paying bills. I'd rather see someone do it right. So someone has 300 acres and they put 40 acres of improvements in. They're better off owning 80 acres since there's so much less investment involved in putting 80 acres worth of improvement. If you have 100 acres, put 100 acres worth of improvements. If you have 200 acres, put 200 acres worth of improvements. It's not a good thing. We have 255 acres here in Minnesota. The property that we hunt in Wisconsin has about 30 acres of cover and 10 acres of fields that we can work with. Much less food plot space over there. Huge difference. 10 water holes here, 3 water holes that we maintain over there. The number of stands are triple here versus there. So the investment we have over there is a lot less. We're over there a lot less to work. Trail cameras, everything, mock scrapes. But the point is, that's a complete property over there. It's a lot smaller. This is a complete property, and it takes an awful lot of work. I put a video out about bow. I shot a buck during the end of October, a target buck we had here. We actually had 4. I didn't realize that Dylan, I don't know where he pulls the stuff out of, but he pulled a video out from 2020 that we had of bow on a trail camera. So for 4 seasons, we've had that buck roaming around here, and we have other people that would have shot that buck around us. And the point is that the amount of work, the amount of hours, resources it took of time and money to have that deer on our property and work and work and work and work is many, many, many dozens of times more than the work it would have taken to shoot a buck on public land. And before you say, well, you didn't even think I hunt public land, I shot about my 30th buck on public land this year out in Pennsylvania with Dylan. Jen came out too. It's in one of my shorts. You can see it. We'll have a video out about that soon. But the point is, I've shot a lot of bucks on public land, and they are a lot less work per buck. A lot less work. It takes a lot of work and time and strategy, huge strategy, to do it right on private land. You're better off owning a smaller property that you can actually fill it with the money you need to spend, the time you need to spend, and the strategy that you need to employ on that property to actually do a good job. And a lot of people don't. That's why I call it the 5% club, 3% club, because less than 5% or 3% of all landowners, I think it's more 3%, actually do a good job with their private land and are getting anywhere close to their potential. Those are the properties that actually have what it takes to hold mature bucks during the daylight, and that's very few in the neighborhood. And a lot of that's because people buy too many acres to begin with. Taking your time, and this applies greatly. I've had clients that have looked for 3 or 4 years for the perfect piece. Why not buy a decent piece the first year that you might be able to make into a perfect piece? You don't know. Invest that time and energy, make it look something special, sell it in 3 years if you want to, if you did everything right to actually build a herd. But a lot of times we're looking at property that, pick the area. If it's in a good area and you don't have a bunch of small neighbors, there's not an obvious sign, it meets the criteria for not too much hardwoods, you can add water where you want. That's the bad thing when you have water everywhere, you can't add it where you want for a great deer stand. But the point is, look at some of these points, look up our tips for buying land, apply that to it, and if it checks off a lot of the boxes, then go ahead and pull the trigger. No need to wait for 3 or 4 years. Get something, it's an investment, and if you don't like it or you want something bigger, step onto something else in a few years. Number 5, ignoring pasture land. And this is something that's kind of interesting. I actually talked to our local real estate agent. He's the biggest real estate agent, I believe, on both sides of the river around here, Minnesota and Wisconsin, on either side of the Mississippi. Chad Garteski with Weiss Realty, they sell the majority of hunting land around here. And he had a recent land that came up that's pasture land. And boy, those pasture land properties can be awesome. There's a few things. For one, it can explode in growth, regeneration. You can add food plots as another thing anywhere you want to. Your access can be changed. You can add switchgrass for cover, screening. Incredible opportunity. It's more of an empty canvas, and it's crazy when you get that cattle off, it explodes. My first property in '95 that I purchased had cattle on it. As soon as the property was gone, we looked at like a golf course in the spring, and by the end of the summer, it was a jungle with 6-8 foot high brush everywhere and willows and everything else growing out there. It was crazy how much it turned into. But another big benefit is cost, because everyone wants those hardwoods, and they look at the pasture land with little woods here and there that's been browsed out and think, well, this is ugly. And it's not just this big wooded property I'm looking for, so it gets diminished in value, and that's a really good thing too. Number 6, public land borders. Do you know how many properties we go to that have public land right next to the clients that is left untouched and not used by hunters, and creates an incredible opportunity? And I'm not saying that's the way it is all the time. If I was looking at a private piece next to 200 acres of public land in lower Michigan between in Oakland County or maybe Washtenaw, where you get into some of the big populated areas, probably not a good idea. But the point is, where you get into a lot of areas where it's mixed ag, public land isn't necessarily a bad thing, depending on how big the public land is. We go to a lot of clients down in Ohio where it's tens of thousands of acres of public land next door. Why is someone to be on that one spot? It's a little bit different around here, because in areas in Minnesota, Wisconsin, you could have 100 acres here, 200 acres there, and a lot of times they are overrun with people. So you have to see that balance. And sometimes I encourage, if you have all these little patchwork pieces of public land in the area, maybe you want to stay at least a mile off those. On the other hand, if you're next to 10,000 acres or more, I was in the UP of Michigan, excuse me, I could use that land almost as my own, walk through it to get to my land, created incredible access, but then I never saw hunters around the borders. And so that was a really good opportunity. But you look at that 5,000 to 10,000 acres or more, and if it's lightly hunted, I know a lot of county land up in northern Wisconsin that gets really lightly hunted with giant bucks on it. So there's a lot of opportunities for public land. Look for big public land chunks. It'll diminish the people on your border. You might want to stay a mile away or more from property where it's patchworked all around you. Number 7, road frontage. This is very interesting. People say, well, I don't want to be along the road because people poach. The stories of poaching anywhere are greatly exaggerated. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but every year there's less and less, fewer poachers out there. And when you have when you have a road frontage right next to your property, you can walk down the road, you're 40 yards in, and you're hunting. You're blowing your scent back at the road. The deer are used to road noise, human noise, so you can get in and out of stands a lot better. And think about the flip. I was at a property the other day that was pretty decent because they had a half-mile access across fields to get to their property. That's okay, but what if those fields are full of deer? What if you have to access a half-mile back to get to a 40 that's surrounded by timber? That's a great thing, but if you can't get into your land or out without spooking deer and creating a deer drive all the way back, that's a very bad thing. So consider road frontage. It's really not a bad thing. A lot of times you can put screening up along the road, or there's already screening there, and it creates some really good access opportunities for you. Number 8, neighbors. Generally, you like to see the bigger the land sizes around you, the better. It doesn't matter if it's public land or private land. When you have those big chunks of land, you know, you buy private, you're buying 80 acres and your neighbors are all 400 acres plus. That's a good thing, because if they're managing their property, there's fewer hunters per acre typically, and that means your potential for a better herd is a lot greater. On the flip side, I go to a lot of, say, central Michigan, northern Michigan properties where, and especially, you know, I'm out of the Gaylord area of Michigan a lot, for example. I'll go to properties in that area or down towards Lansing, somewhere in between, where someone's buying 20 acres or 30 acres, but it's next to 10, 5, a neighborhood of 1 and 2 acres, another 40 somewhere. And when you add that many hunters that might be hunting just out their back window, out meaning they go out and they go 100 yards in the woods and sit down, times 10 small properties around you, that's a really bad thing. You limit the number of hunters if you have something a little bit bigger. And then you can also see, consider that most people, the majority of people that have food plots, a vast majority of them, if you can look on an aerial, you look at HuntWise, you can choose from 5 different aerial images to look down in from very recent to past, see if the neighbors have food plots. If they do, 80% of those, 90% of those are hunting them poorly. They're driving through them, they have blinds in them, they spook the deer off them every day. That creates opportunity for you. That means if you add food, they'll probably recognize yours as a daylight parcel if you do it right. And it's not that hard to do it right. You just have to give the deer the impression they're not being hunted. Neighbors will do it poorly. You create the daylight herd on your property. They have the nocturnal herd on your property. You've seen that time and time again. So really consider your neighbors when you're going out there. And you can do that, a lot of that, just by looking at property borders, size of borders, and food plots, and what other people have done on those properties before you even get out to the land. Number 9, access easement. We've seen some really bad situations with this where, yeah, this is a really cool property. It might meet all and check off all the great attributes of a good parcel, but there's an easement going right through the middle of it to get to a neighbor's property behind it. That could be a really bad thing because you can't control when they're coming in and out. It's not a good thing. Legal easement, access. Consider easement, and you know, obviously I'm not an attorney, but easement means to access. So you can't park on easements for the most part. Like we have a half-mile easement route here that goes to one piece of the property, and then right next to it we own 33 feet. I can park on that 33 feet, I can block it, I can gate it, I can do whatever I want with it. But on the easement, I have to use it to easement as access to get all the way to the back of the property and park on our own property. So don't always look at it and say, well, we have an easement, we're just going to park 200 yards back, walk the remaining 300 yards, get to the property, won't spook any deer. That might not be legal in your area. Number 10, bad government programs. Doesn't matter if it's CRP, MFL, anything that you can, CREP programs where you enroll your property in for a long period of time and get a tax advantage. It's always great if you need that tax advantage, that's kind of up to you, but you buy the property, do what you want whitetail wise, and then enroll it into the program. That's a great thing to do. Dylan had a property I think he worked on last year where it was in CRP or MFL. It was out of the MFL. It was that period where they could do a lot of work, and then they just re-enrolled it. They did all the work in between that time. Was it 6 months or a year that they had to do something, or what was that?
I think it was about a year.
Yeah, and so they could get the things done they want and not have to worry about it. I've seen programs that are so strict that my client is telling me they were out making an ATV trail on their property, just mowing through grass, weeds, brush to get to the back of the property because they had no road access to get back there. And the plant administrators driving by on the road and actually went out and told them that was prohibited, illegal under the plan for them to even make a road through there. I think that was a CREP program. But they couldn't even make a road to get to the back of their property, even though it was all high and dry. They couldn't actually mow a trail back there. So some of them can be very prohibitive. I'll give you a little insight to that. There's an MFL plan writer that I worked on a client property last week. I had 5 clients last week. That's my first run for the year, and then it goes through September next year. Every month I have a trip, and they're all Wisconsin. But there's an MFL plan writer that's there. He was awesome. And most of them that we met are really awesome. There's been one or two stinkers I've met in Wisconsin, but for the most part, they've all been really good. Dylan, you probably had real good experience with them?
Yeah, for the most part. It seems like they're really coming around and they can, work to make everybody happy.
Yeah, and it seems like this one that I met, he was a hardcore whitetail hunter. He has land, and guess what he told me? He would never enroll his property in MFL. It's so kind of interesting, and it's because he doesn't want to be told what he can or cannot do on the property. He wants to have that full license to build that property to be as attractive as possible. And all these programs will limit you in some way. CRP, if you have to plant their crappy mixes, it's going to lay down all winter. It's supposed to be for wildlife, you thought. There's no cover from November, December, all the way to March, April. And guess what? You have no wildlife, let alone deer cover. So a lot of the pheasant mixes are horrible. It's great. Everyone's looking for that latest, greatest mix. You have to separate grasses that'll hold up for cover, and then pollinator, shrubs, different blends separate from that within the same field so that there's browse and cover together. I usually recommend when you have that browse and cover together, you'd want more like especially if you're planting pollinator, it'd be more like 4-part switchgrass, 3-part switchgrass to 1-part pollinator. Thin strips of pollinator, because that's the area where birds of prey, predators can get those little critters and wildlife. You want smaller, slender, long. Think about pheasants. They typically don't fly to get away from predators, they run. And so you want long strips of cover for them to do so. We have 3.1 miles of edge here in Minnesota, so it helps us build a pheasant population here. We're getting lots of videos now. We didn't get those last year, even videos, so it's pretty cool to see that population explosion. But bottom line, a lot of those programs, it doesn't matter if your intention is pheasant, rabbits, wildlife in general, deer, are not necessarily good for wildlife. So really go into that with your eyes open. And especially, I'm seeing people that are considering the cost of the land as part of the and the government program buyout to be a cost of that land per acre. They're looking at like, okay, this land's listed for $300,000. It's going to cost me $22,000 to buy out the program or whatever the cost is, and so my actual cost is this. We're actually seeing that because people don't want to lose control, especially when it comes to deer land. Always look at the land, figure out what you need done first, get it done, and then enroll it in a program if you need that for the cost basis. And you might have been that you just buy a smaller piece. You don't have to worry about getting that tax advantage in the first place and losing that level of control. I'm not saying those programs aren't good in some way here and there, but in general, a lot of them are so restrictive that it'll actually hurt your ability to create great wildlife populations, let alone whitetail. So these are some of the mistakes we see often. Dylan, did I cover them all? Do you think of it? I think we went over this one, and I hope they help you not only keep from making mistakes this year, but actually by doing the opposite, build a great whitetail and wildlife habitat on your property or your next lease property or wherever you hunt. A lot of this applies to where you hunt too. The diversity, the age of timber, things like that is really critical. Even if you're looking for your next great piece on public land, these tips of what to avoid, you can also turn around for what to actually look for to making sure you build or find a great wildlife habitat for this next season. Now, I appreciate you guys watching the YouTube channel, but I don't know if everyone knows everything that we have to offer, whether it's on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, our website, or WHS Wildlife Blends, our seed company. Also Instagram you can check out. I'm very active on Instagram, putting strategies on there, photos of what we do every day. Much more active there than Facebook. But our seed, web classes, books, clients, articles. I have over 600 articles on whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, everything whitetail strategy. Of course, we have hats on there, and then make sure to check us out on Instagram again. But lots of stuff to offer. We're always coming out with new things, and this isn't the end of it. We have more things coming soon. Make sure to check us out.